The fluorescent lights of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center hummed softly as Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her computer monitor for the third time that morning. Coffee steam rose from her mug, carrying the bitter aroma that had become her constant companion during these late research sessions. Outside her office window, the Maryland countryside stretched endlessly under grey October clouds, but Sarah's attention was fixed entirely on the digitized photograph glowing on her screen. Historical Documentation Project, American Inventors 1880-1920, read the folder label on her desktop. What had started as a routine assignment to compile visual materials for an educational documentary had turned into something far more intriguing. Sarah specialized in digital image analysis, using cutting-edge software to enhance and examine photographs for NASA's various research projects. Most days involved satellite imagery or telescope captures, but this assignment was different. She clicked through the collection of photographs, each one a window into America's industrial past. There was Edison in his Menlo Park laboratory, surrounded by his famous light bulbs, Henry Ford standing beside one of his early automobiles, the Wright brothers with their flying machine, standard historical documentation, exactly what she expected to find. Then she reached the photograph that would change everything. The image showed a man in his early 40s, wearing the typical dark suit and high collar of the early 1900s. His hair was neatly parted, his moustache perfectly groomed in the fashion of the era. He stood confidently in what appeared to be a well-equipped laboratory, surrounded by brass instruments, electrical apparatus, and various mechanical contraptions that spoke of serious scientific work. The caption beneath read, Thomas Whitmore, electrical engineer and inventor, Detroit, Michigan, 1901. Sarah had never heard of Thomas Whitmore, which wasn't unusual. Many brilliant inventors from that era had been forgotten by history, overshadowed by the more famous names like Edison and Tesla. But as she began running the image through her standard enhancement protocols, something caught her eye. Behind Whitmore, partially obscured by the shadows of his laboratory equipment, was a faint, luminous shape. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a photographic artifact, perhaps light reflection from the flash powder used in early photography, or a developing error from the primitive chemicals of the time. But Sarah's trained eye saw something different. She enlarged the section, adjusting contrast and brightness levels. The shape became clearer, a perfect sphere, glowing with an inner light that seemed almost organic in nature. More disturbing still, the sphere appeared to be hovering several feet off the ground, with no visible means of support. Probably just a double exposure, she murmured to herself, but her fingers were already flying over the keyboard, bringing up more sophisticated analysis tools. The spectral analysis results made her pause. The luminous orb was emitting light at wavelengths that seemed impossible for 1901 technology. The electromagnetic signature suggested energy patterns that wouldn't be discovered by human science for decades after the photograph was taken. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the monitor. In her 5 years at NASA, she had analyzed thousands of images, from Mars surface photos to deep space telescope captures. She knew the difference between photographic anomalies and genuine mysteries. This was definitely the latter. She reached for her phone and dialed her supervisor's extension. Dr. Michael Rodriguez arrived at Sarah's office within 20 minutes, his usually calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity that emerged whenever something genuinely puzzling crossed his desk. As the head of NASA's Digital Analysis Division, he had seen his share of anomalies, but the excitement in Sarah's voice over the phone had been unmistakable. "Show me what you found," he said, settling into the chair beside Sarah's workstation. Sarah pulled up the enhanced image of Thomas Whitmore's photograph. "Look at this area behind the subject," she said, pointing to the luminous orb. "At first I thought it was just a standard photographic artifact from 1901, but the spectral analysis is telling a different story." Rodriguez leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing as he studied the glowing sphere. "What kind of different story?" "The light emission patterns don't match anything that should have been possible in 1901. Look at these wavelength readings." Sarah brought up a series of graphs and data charts. "This orb is producing electromagnetic signatures that suggest advanced energy manipulation. We're talking about technology that wouldn't be theoretically possible until at least the 1940s, and practically achievable maybe not until the 1980s. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Could this be some kind of hoax? Maybe the photograph was altered at some point? I ran it through every authentication protocol we have. The photographic paper, the chemical composition of the developing agents, even the silver halide distribution patterns, everything confirms this image was genuinely created in 1901. No digital manipulation, no later additions. And you're certain about the spectral analysis? Sarah nodded emphatically. I've run it 3 times using different algorithms. The results are consistent. Whatever that orb is, it was generating energy signatures that shouldn't exist in 1901 technology. Rodriguez stood up and began pacing, a habit Sarah recognized as his thinking mode. Tell me about this Thomas Whitmore. What do we know about him? That's where things get interesting, Sarah replied, opening a new window on her screen. I started doing some research after I found the anomaly. Thomas Whitmore was apparently a brilliant electrical engineer working independently in Detroit during the early 1900s. He held several patents for electrical devices, some of which were remarkably advanced for their time. She pulled up a scanned document. This is a patent application from 1902 for something he called an electromagnetic field harmonizer. The technical specifications are fascinating. He's describing principles that wouldn't be formally understood by mainstream science for decades. What happened to him? Rodriguez asked. That's where the story gets strange. According to the records I could find, Whitmore disappeared in 1903, just vanished without a trace. His laboratory was found empty, all his equipment gone. The local newspapers from Detroit reported it as a simple case of a man leaving town for better opportunities, but you don't think that's what really happened? Sarah shook her head. I found a police report filed by one of his assistants, a man named Edgar Mills. Mills claimed that strange things had been happening in Whitmore's laboratory for months before the disappearance. Equipment operating on its own, unexplained lights, and what Mills described as voices coming from nowhere. Rodriguez stopped pacing and turned to face Sarah directly. Voices. According to Mills' statement, Whitmore had become increasingly obsessed with what he called communications from beyond the visible spectrum. Mills reported that in the weeks before Whitmore disappeared, the inventor had been working around the clock, claiming he was on the verge of a breakthrough that would change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. The office fell silent except for the soft hum of computer equipment and the distant sound of traffic outside. Rodriguez stared at the photograph on Sarah's monitor, his mind working through the implications of what they had discovered. Sarah, he said finally, I want you to put together a comprehensive report on everything you've found, include all the technical analysis, the historical research, everything. And I want you to be discreet about this for now. You think this is significant enough to warrant a full investigation? Rodriguez looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of excitement and concern that made her stomach tighten with anticipation. Sarah, in my 20 years with NASA, I've learned to trust my instincts about these things, and my instincts are telling me that Thomas Whitmore discovered something in 1901 that we're only beginning to understand today. The question is, what exactly did he find and where did it come from? The gaslight flickered against the brick walls of Thomas Whitmore's laboratory as he made final adjustments to his latest creation. Outside, the industrial sounds of Detroit's rapidly expanding manufacturing district created a constant backdrop of steam engines, hammering, and the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages navigating the muddy streets. The year 1901 had brought unprecedented growth to the city, with new factories and workshops sprouting like mushrooms after rain. But inside his converted warehouse laboratory, Whitmore worked in a world that seemed decades ahead of its time. Brass instruments gleamed under the electric lights he had installed, using his own generator, one of the few buildings in this part of Detroit to have such modern illumination. Copper coils wrapped around glass tubes created intricate patterns that would have seemed like art to most observers. But to Whitmore, they represented the very edges of human understanding. Professor Whitmore? The voice belonged to Edgar Mills, his young assistant, who stood nervously in the doorway holding a camera and tripod. The photographer from the Detroit Tribune is here for your appointment. Whitmore looked up from his workbench, his intense blue eyes reflecting the electric lights. At 42, he possessed the confident bearing of a man who had spent his life pushing boundaries others feared to approach. His colleagues at the University of Michigan had called him brilliant but reckless when he left his teaching position to pursue independent research. They simply couldn't understand his vision. Excellent timing, Edgar. Set up the camera near the main workbench. I want to make sure they capture the electromagnetic field generator in the background. As Mills arranged the photographic equipment, Whitmore straightened his collar and smoothed his dark hair. Public recognition was important for securing funding, though he sometimes wondered if the world was ready for what he had discovered. The newspaper articles would help legitimize his work, but they could never convey the true magnitude of his findings. The photographer, a thin man named Henderson, emerged from beneath the black cloth that covered his camera. "Ready when you are, Professor. Just stand naturally beside your equipment." Whitmore positioned himself next to his prized invention, a complex arrangement of copper coils and crystal formations that he had spent 2 years perfecting. The device hummed with a barely audible frequency that seemed to resonate in the bones of anyone who stood near it. Mills had mentioned feeling dizzy around the machine, but Whitmore found its presence oddly comforting. "Hold very still now," Henderson called out, preparing his flash powder. "This will be bright." As the photographer counted down, Whitmore felt a familiar tingling sensation at the base of his skull. The electromagnetic field generator was responding to something, perhaps the electrical activity of the camera's flash preparation. He had noticed these episodes becoming more frequent lately, always accompanied by what he could only describe as whispers, just beyond the range of human hearing. The flash powder ignited with a brilliant burst of white light, temporarily blinding everyone in the laboratory. In that moment of searing illumination, Whitmore felt the sensation intensify dramatically. The whispers became almost audible, carrying words in no language he recognized yet somehow understood. They spoke of vast distances, of purposes that spanned centuries, of a patience that measured time in geological epochs rather than human lifespans. And underneath it all a sense of approval, as though his work had been anticipated, even guided. When the spots cleared from his vision, Whitmore found Mills and Henderson blinking and rubbing their eyes. Neither seemed to have experienced anything unusual, but Whitmore's hands were trembling slightly. He clasped them behind his back to hide his reaction. "Excellent," Henderson said, making notes in his logbook. "That should make a fine addition to your article, Professor. Very dramatic lighting in here, quite fitting for a man of science pushing the boundaries of human knowledge." After the photographer left, Mills began cleaning up the equipment, while Whitmore stood motionless beside his electromagnetic generator. The device continued its subtle humming, but the whispers had faded to their usual barely perceptible level. "Professor," Mills ventured, "are you feeling well? You look rather pale." Whitmore turned to face his assistant, and Mills was struck by an expression he had never seen before in his mentor's eyes, a mixture of excitement and something that might have been fear. "Edgar," Whitmore said quietly, "I believe we are on the verge of a discovery that will change everything. The question is whether humanity is ready for such a change." Mills frowned, not understanding the gravity in Whitmore's voice. "Sir?" But Whitmore had already returned to his workbench, his attention focused on adjustments that would push his electromagnetic field generator to new levels of sensitivity. He had work to do, communications to establish, and very little time to accomplish what needed to be done. In the shadows behind him, though neither man noticed, the air shimmered with the faintest suggestion of light, a luminous presence that watched and waited with infinite patience. 3 days after the photograph was taken, Thomas Whitmore stood in his laboratory at 3 in the morning, surrounded by equipment that hummed and sparked with electrical energy. Sleep had become elusive since the flash powder incident. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear the whispers growing stronger, more insistent, as though something was trying to break through a barrier that grew thinner each day. His electromagnetic field generator had undergone significant modifications. Copper coils now extended across the ceiling in intricate patterns, connected to glass tubes filled with various gases that created an ethereal blue-green glow throughout the laboratory. The entire space had been transformed into what he privately thought of as a receiving station, though he wasn't entirely certain what he was trying to receive. Edgar Mills had expressed concerns about working so late, but Whitmore had dismissed his assistant for the evening. This work required absolute concentration, and he couldn't risk distraction when he was so close to a breakthrough. The whispers had become more coherent over the past few days, forming what seemed like instructions or coordinates in a language that bypassed his conscious mind and spoke directly to his intuition. As he adjusted the frequency modulation on his primary oscillator, the air in the laboratory began to change. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the electrical devices started producing harmonics that created an almost musical quality to their collective hum. Whitmore felt the familiar tingling at the base of his skull intensify until it became a genuine physical sensation, as though invisible fingers were probing the edges of his consciousness. Then the lights began to dim. One by one, his electric bulbs faded to a warm amber glow, while the gas-filled tubes grew brighter in compensation. The effect created an otherworldly atmosphere that made the laboratory feel more like a cathedral than a workshop. And in that transformed space, something extraordinary began to manifest. At first it was just a distortion in the air near the far wall, a shimmer like heat waves rising from sun-baked pavement. But as Whitmore watched with growing fascination, the distortion began to coalesce into a distinct shape. A sphere of pure light materialized, hovering approximately 6 feet above the floor with no visible means of support. The orb pulsed with its own inner radiance, cycling through colors that had no names in human language. Whitmore found himself walking toward it, as though drawn by invisible threads, his scientific mind racing to understand what he was witnessing, while his deeper instincts simply marveled at its beauty. As he approached, the whispers in his mind became clearer, resolving into concepts rather than words. Images flooded his consciousness, vast star fields, civilizations that rose and fell like waves on a cosmic ocean, and always the sense of watchers, patient observers, who had been monitoring humanity's progress for far longer than recorded history. The orb pulsed brighter, and suddenly Whitmore understood that this was no random phenomenon. This was contact, deliberate, purposeful communication from intelligences that existed beyond the boundaries of human perception. They had been waiting for someone to develop the right combination of technology and intuition to serve as a bridge between worlds. "What do you want from me?" he whispered aloud, though he somehow knew that vocal communication was unnecessary. The response came not as words, but as a flood of understanding that nearly overwhelmed his human consciousness. They were explorers like himself, seeking knowledge across impossible distances. They had watched humanity's early attempts to harness electromagnetic forces and recognized a kindred intelligence struggling to expand beyond its planetary boundaries. But there was urgency in their communication. Other watchers existed in the cosmos, entities with far less benevolent intentions toward emerging civilizations. Humanity's rapid technological advancement had attracted attention from multiple sources, and a choice would soon have to be made about the planet's future. Whitmore felt himself being offered a role as intermediary, a translator who could help establish formal communication between humanity and these cosmic observers. But the process would require sacrifices, changes to his very nature that would separate him forever from ordinary human existence. The orb began to pulse faster, and Whitmore realized that his laboratory equipment was resonating with its energy patterns. Every device in the room hummed in perfect harmony, creating a symphony of electromagnetic frequencies that seemed to open doorways in the fabric of reality itself. Through these doorways, he glimpsed the true scope of the universe, not the empty void that human astronomy imagined, but a thriving community of intelligences connected by forces that transcended physical space. Humanity stood at a crossroads, poised to either join this greater community or face the consequences of remaining isolated in an increasingly dangerous cosmos. As the vision faded and the orb began to dim, Whitmore understood that he had been chosen for a mission that would extend far beyond his mortal lifetime. The electromagnetic signature he had captured would serve as a beacon, a signal that would eventually be recognized by future generations when humanity had developed the technology to properly interpret his work. The orb vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the normal glow of his laboratory lights. But Thomas Whitmore was no longer the same man who had entered the room hours earlier. He now carried within him knowledge that would reshape his understanding of existence itself and the terrible responsibility of preparing humanity for what was to come. Dr. Sarah Chen pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the Detroit Public Library's historical archives, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and determination written across her face. The musty smell of old paper and binding glue enveloped her as she approached the reference desk, where an elderly librarian with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from her cataloging work. "I'm looking for any records related to Thomas Whitmore, an inventor who worked in Detroit around 1901 to 1903, Sarah said, producing her NASA identification, particularly any newspaper articles, police reports, or personal documents. The librarian, whose nameplate read Mrs. Eleanor Davidson, studied the ID with interest. NASA? My goodness, what would space researchers want with a century-old Detroit inventor? "It's related to a historical documentation project," Sarah replied, which was technically true, though it hardly captured the full scope of what she was investigating. Mrs. Davidson led her through narrow aisles lined with filing cabinets and bound newspaper volumes to a corner table equipped with a microfilm reader. Thomas Whitmore. Yes, I remember that name. Brilliant man, from what the old records indicate. Also quite mysterious. He had quite a reputation in the local scientific community before he disappeared. Over the next several hours, Sarah immersed herself in the fragments of Thomas Whitmore's life that had survived more than a century. The Detroit Tribune had run several articles about his inventions, describing him as a visionary whose electrical innovations rival those of the great Edison himself. But as she read deeper, a more complex picture emerged. A police report from October 1903 described concerned neighbors reporting strange lights and sounds coming from Whitmore's laboratory at all hours. Multiple witnesses claimed to have seen unnatural illuminations that seemed to move with purpose through the windows of his converted warehouse. One neighbor, a Mrs. Catherine Murphy, insisted that she had observed ghostly figures entering and leaving the building, though she admitted the sightings occurred only during what she called the nights of peculiar atmospheric disturbances. But the most revealing document was a personal journal that had been donated to the archives by Whitmore's great-nephew in 1967. The leather-bound book contained entries spanning from January 1901 to his disappearance in November 1903, written in Whitmore's precise, scientific handwriting. Sarah photographed each page with her phone, her excitement growing as she read entries that seemed to chronicle an increasingly extraordinary series of events. January 15, 1901. The new electromagnetic oscillator is producing frequencies that appear to affect the behavior of nearby compass needles. More intriguingly, I have noticed that certain metallic objects in the laboratory arrange themselves into geometric patterns overnight, as though responding to some form of invisible organizing principle. March 3, 1901. Edgar has commented on what he describes as voices near the field generator. I have heard them too, though they seem to exist at the very edge of audible perception. I suspect we are detecting some form of electromagnetic phenomenon that mimics human speech patterns. September 7, 1901. The photographic session with the Tribune has yielded unexpected results. I have reason to believe that our electromagnetic experiments have attracted the attention of intelligences operating beyond conventional scientific understanding. The implications are both thrilling and terrifying. As Sarah continued reading, the entries became increasingly detailed and difficult to dismiss as the fantasies of an eccentric inventor. Whitmore described systematic contact with what he called the observers, entities that communicated through electromagnetic manipulation and seemed to possess knowledge of scientific principles that wouldn't be discovered by human researchers for decades. November 12, 1902. They have shown me images of other worlds, other civilizations that have faced the same crossroads now approaching humanity. The choice we make in the coming years will determine whether we join the greater community of conscious beings or face the consequences of cosmic isolation. April 21, 1903. I understand now why I was chosen for this work. My electromagnetic research has created a beacon that will persist long after my physical form ceases to exist. Future generations, when they have developed adequate technology, will be able to detect and interpret this signal. I am to serve as a bridge between humanity's present and its potential future. The final entries were the most disturbing. October 30th, 1903. The observers have warned me of others, entities with different intentions regarding emerging civilizations. My work has apparently attracted multiple forms of attention, not all of it benevolent. I must complete the preservation protocols before it becomes necessary to relocate. November 15th, 1903. Edgar grows more frightened each day. He speaks of nightmares filled with geometric shapes and sounds that seem to come from inside his own mind. I fear my research has placed him in danger. Tonight, I will activate the final sequence and transfer the complete electromagnetic signature to the crystalline matrices. If successful, the beacon will remain active indefinitely, waiting for the proper technology to decode its message. The journal ended abruptly after that entry. According to police records, Thomas Whitmore was reported missing on November 18, 1903. His laboratory was found completely empty, not just of equipment, but of any trace that scientific work had ever been conducted there. Even the electrical wiring had been removed. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling from what she had read. If Whitmore's journal was accurate, then the glowing orb in the 1901 photograph wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was evidence of first contact between humanity and extraterrestrial intelligence, documented more than a century before the modern UFO era. But more disturbing was Whitmore's reference to others with malevolent intentions. If NASA's analysis of the photograph had reactivated some kind of beacon, what else might they have attracted attention from? Sarah gathered her materials and headed back to her car, already planning her report for Dr. Rodriguez. As she drove through the dark Detroit streets toward the airport, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not by human eyes, but by something far older and more patient, something that had been waiting over a century for humanity to develop the technology to properly understand Thomas Whitmore's final warning. Dr. Sarah Chen's presentation to the emergency assembly at NASA Goddard had lasted 3 hours, but the silence that followed felt endless. The conference room held 12 of the facility's most senior researchers, including Dr. Rodriguez, the facility director Dr. James Harrison, and specialists from various departments who had been called in to evaluate Sarah's findings. The wall-mounted screens displayed the enhanced photograph of Thomas Whitmore alongside spectral analyses, historical documents, and journal excerpts that painted an increasingly impossible picture. Dr. Harrison, a man known for his measured responses to even the most extraordinary discoveries, sat with his fingers steepled, staring at the evidence with an expression that cycled between fascination and deep concern. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Dr. Harrison said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "You're suggesting that this 1901 photograph contains evidence of extraterrestrial contact and that our digital analysis has somehow reactivated a signal that's been dormant for over a century." "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Sarah replied, her confidence bolstered by the mountain of evidence she had assembled. Thomas Whitmore's journal entries, the electromagnetic signatures in the photograph, the historical accounts of strange phenomena, they all point to the same conclusion. And there's more. She clicked to a new slide, showing recent data from various NASA monitoring stations. "Over the past week, since we began intensive analysis of the photograph, we've detected anomalous electromagnetic activity at 7 different facilities. Radio telescopes are picking up structured signals that match the spectral patterns from Whitmore's orb. Our deep space monitoring equipment is registering energy signatures that shouldn't exist." Dr. Lisa Park, the facility's xenobiology specialist, leaned forward in her chair. "Sarah, even if we accept your interpretation of the historical evidence, what you're describing violates several fundamental principles of physics. How could a 19th century inventor create technology that we're only now beginning to understand?" "Because he wasn't working alone," Sarah responded. According to his journal, he was receiving guidance from what he called the observers. His electromagnetic field generator wasn't just an invention, it was a communication device, built according to specifications provided by extraterrestrial intelligences. The room erupted in murmured conversations as the implications sank in. Dr. Rodriguez stood up, walking to the screens displaying the photograph. "Assuming Sarah's analysis is correct, we need to consider our next steps very carefully. If this beacon has been reactivated, we may have initiated contact whether we intended to or not." As if summoned by his words, Dr. Harrison's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, his expression growing grave. "We have a situation in Laboratory 7. The quantum mechanics team reports that their equipment is behaving erratically, producing readings that suggest localized space-time distortions." Sarah felt her heart race. Laboratory 7 was 3 floors below the conference room, in the section of the facility where NASA conducted its most sensitive research into theoretical physics and advanced propulsion systems. "When did this start?" 20 minutes ago, Dr. Harrison replied. "Right around the time you began discussing the reactivation of Whitmore's beacon." The group moved quickly through the corridors of the Goddard facility, their footsteps echoing in the sterile hallways lined with photographs of space missions and scientific achievements. But as they approached Laboratory 7, Sarah noticed that something was wrong with the atmosphere itself. The air felt charged, similar to the sensation before a thunderstorm, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently. Dr. Chen Kim, the lead quantum researcher, met them at the laboratory entrance. His normally composed demeanor was replaced by barely controlled excitement and fear. "You need to see this," he said, leading them into the lab. Laboratory 7 housed some of NASA's most advanced experimental equipment, including a prototype quantum field manipulator that had been designed to test theoretical concepts about faster-than-light communication. But now, the entire laboratory hummed with energy that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. In the center of the room, hovering approximately 6 feet above the main experimental platform, was a sphere of pure light. Sarah gasped, recognizing it immediately from Thomas Whitmore's journal descriptions. The orb pulsed with the same ethereal radiance captured in the 1901 photograph, cycling through colors that existed beyond normal human perception. But this manifestation was far more vivid and present than anything the primitive photography of Whitmore's era could have documented. "It materialized about 15 minutes ago," Dr. Kim explained, his voice hushed with awe. "Our instruments indicate that it's generating electromagnetic fields, unlike anything in our database. The energy patterns are incredibly complex, almost like a language." As the group watched in stunned silence, the orb began to pulse in a rhythmic pattern that seemed oddly familiar. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the app she had been using to analyze the spectral data from Whitmore's photograph. The pulse pattern matched exactly the hidden frequencies she had discovered in the original image. "It's trying to communicate," she whispered, "the same signal that Whitmore recorded over a century ago." Dr. Rodriguez stepped closer to the experimental platform, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. "Can we establish two-way communication? Do we have equipment that can respond to its signals?" But before anyone could answer, the orb's pulsing accelerated dramatically. The laboratory's equipment began resonating in harmony, creating a symphony of electromagnetic frequencies that seemed to open doorways in reality itself. And through those doorways, the assembled researchers glimpsed something that would forever change their understanding of humanity's place in the universe. The vast network of intelligences that Thomas Whitmore had discovered in 1901 was still there, still watching, still waiting. But now, after more than a century of patient observation, they were ready to move beyond passive monitoring. The beacon had been activated, the signal received, and first contact was no longer a theoretical possibility. It was happening right now. The orb's pulsing reached a crescendo that made the air itself seem to vibrate with purpose. In Laboratory 7, the assembled NASA researchers stood transfixed as their sophisticated equipment registered energy readings that defied conventional physics. Dr. Sarah Chen felt the same tingling sensation at the base of her skull that Thomas Whitmore had described in his journal, as though invisible fingers were probing the edges of her consciousness. Then, without warning, the communication began. It didn't come as words or images, but as a direct transfer of understanding that bypassed human language entirely. Each person in the laboratory experienced the contact differently, but the core message remained consistent across all minds: acknowledgement, patience, and urgency. Sarah found herself seeing Earth from an impossible perspective, not as astronauts viewed it from orbit, but as it appeared to intelligences that existed beyond the constraints of physical space. The planet glowed with the electromagnetic signatures of billions of conscious minds, a beacon of developing intelligence that had been monitored for millennia. Beside her, Dr. Rodriguez was experiencing visions of vast stellar distances, traversed not through conventional space travel, but by entities that existed as pure information, traveling along electromagnetic pathways that connected star systems like neurons in a cosmic brain. The observers weren't alien visitors in the traditional sense. They were explorers of consciousness itself, seeking to make contact with emerging civilizations at the crucial moment when such contact could be properly understood. Dr. Harrison, typically the most skeptical member of any research team, found his mind flooded with mathematical concepts that revealed the true nature of reality. Space and time weren't fixed constants, but malleable dimensions that could be manipulated by sufficiently advanced understanding of electromagnetic principles. The universe was far more alive and interconnected than human science had ever suspected. But threading through all their experiences was a note of growing alarm. The observer's message carried warnings about other entities, the others that Whitmore had mentioned in his final journal entries. Where the observers sought to guide and nurture developing civilizations, the others viewed emerging intelligence as a threat to be eliminated or controlled. Humanity's rapid technological advancement over the past century had attracted attention from multiple sources. The atomic age, space exploration, and particularly the development of global communications networks had created electromagnetic signatures that were impossible to hide from entities capable of monitoring such phenomena. Across interstellar distances, the orb's pulsing began to slow, but the intensity of its communication increased. Through the shared experience, the researchers understood that they were receiving what amounted to a final warning. The others were already en route to Earth, drawn by the same technological signatures that had attracted the observers' benevolent attention. But there was hope. Thomas Whitmore's work in 1901 had created more than just a beacon. It had established the foundation for a defense network. Hidden within his electromagnetic research were principles that could be used to shield human consciousness from the other's methods of control and manipulation. The key lay in understanding and replicating the frequency patterns he had discovered during his contact with the observers. As the communication neared its end, Sarah felt herself being shown specific technical specifications, modifications to existing NASA equipment that would allow for ongoing contact with the observers and potentially create protective fields around critical installations. The knowledge felt foreign yet somehow familiar, as though she were remembering rather than learning. The orb began to fade, but not before delivering one final piece of information that chilled every person in the laboratory. The others would arrive within 72 hours. When the light finally dissipated, leaving only the normal glow of the laboratory's fluorescent fixtures, the researchers stood in stunned silence. Dr. Kim was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did everyone else experience that? Or am I suffering from some kind of electromagnetic-induced hallucination?" "We all experienced it," Dr. Harrison confirmed, though his usual authority was replaced by uncertainty. "The question is whether we can trust what we experienced. Mass hallucinations aren't unknown in high-stress situations." Sarah moved to the computer terminals and began pulling up the data that had been recorded during the contact. "Look at these readings," she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Every instrument in the laboratory registered the same phenomenon. This wasn't a hallucination, this was genuine information transfer using principles we're only beginning to understand. Dr. Rodriguez joined her at the terminal, studying the complex waveform patterns that had been captured during the communication. Sarah's right. These frequency signatures match the patterns from Whitmore's photograph, but they're far more complex. It's as though we received a compressed data stream containing information that would normally require months of conventional communication to transmit. "Assuming what we experienced was real," Dr. Harrison said slowly, "we have less than 3 days to prepare for what may be the most significant event in human history, or the most catastrophic." Sarah looked around the laboratory at her colleagues, seeing her own mixture of excitement and terror reflected in their faces. They had sought answers about a century-old photograph and instead discovered that humanity stood at the crossroads between joining a galactic community of consciousness and facing subjugation by entities with far less benevolent intentions. "We need to contact every major research facility on the planet," she said, her voice growing stronger with resolve. "If the observers were telling the truth, then we have very little time to implement the defensive measures they showed us. Thomas Whitmore started this process over a century ago. Now it's up to us to finish what he began." Outside the laboratory windows, the Maryland sky seemed darker than usual, as though the stars themselves were holding their breath in anticipation of what was to come. 48 hours after the contact in Laboratory 7, NASA Goddard had been transformed into a fortress of electromagnetic activity. Working around the clock, teams of researchers from around the world had converged on the facility to implement the defensive protocols received from the observers. The main laboratory now housed a complex array of modified equipment that hummed with the same frequencies Thomas Whitmore had discovered over a century earlier. Sarah Chen hadn't slept in 36 hours, but adrenaline and the weight of cosmic responsibility kept her focused as she made final adjustments to the primary electromagnetic shield generator. The device represented a fusion of Whitmore's 1901 principles with cutting-edge NASA technology, creating something that existed at the very edge of human scientific capability. "Frequency harmonics are stable across all 7 nodes," reported Dr. Kim from his monitoring station. "The quantum field resonance is holding within acceptable parameters." Dr. Rodriguez, coordinating communications with facilities worldwide, looked up from his console with grim satisfaction. "We've established successful connections with CERN, the Tokyo Institute of Technology, MIT, and 12 other research centers. They're all reporting stable shield generation using our specifications. But despite their progress, an atmosphere of dread permeated the facility. The observers had been clear about the timeline, and satellite monitoring stations around the globe were detecting anomalous energy signatures in Earth's upper atmosphere. Whatever was coming had already begun to arrive. Dr. Harrison entered the laboratory, carrying a tablet displaying real-time data from the Hubble Space Telescope. His expression was grave as he addressed the assembled team. "We're getting visual confirmation from multiple orbital platforms. There are objects approaching Earth that don't match any known astronomical phenomena." Sarah paused in her work to examine the images on Harrison's tablet. The photographs showed dark geometric shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, moving through space in formations that suggested intelligence and purpose. Unlike the graceful orbs associated with the observers, these entities appeared angular and predatory, their very presence seeming to create distortions in the fabric of space around them. "How long until they reach Earth?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Based on their current velocity and trajectory, first contact in approximately 18 hours, Harrison replied. "But Sarah, there's something else. These objects aren't just approaching Earth, they're taking positions around the planet in a pattern that suggests they're preparing for some kind of coordinated action." Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Dr. Kim's monitoring equipment was registering massive electromagnetic disturbances that seemed to be emanating from multiple points around the globe simultaneously. On screens throughout the laboratory, data streams showed that research facilities worldwide were under some form of attack. "The CERN facility has gone dark," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with concern. "Tokyo is reporting total electromagnetic interference. MIT's shield generators have been overwhelmed." Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized what was happening. The others weren't waiting for physical arrival to begin their assault. They were attacking through the same electromagnetic spectrum that the observers used for communication. But where the observers sought contact and understanding, the others were attempting something far more sinister. "They're trying to penetrate human consciousness directly," she said, understanding flooding through her as she recalled Whitmore's warnings about entities that could manipulate minds through electromagnetic manipulation. The research facilities around the world, they're not just being shut down, they're being invaded. As if responding to her words, the laboratory's equipment began registering a new type of signal, harsh, discordant frequencies that seemed designed to disrupt rather than communicate. The electromagnetic shield generators that had been functioning perfectly moments earlier started showing signs of stress as something probed their defenses. "Doctor," Kim suddenly staggered away from his console, pressing his hands to his temples. "There are voices," he gasped, "inside my head. They're speaking in patterns that hurt to understand." Other team members began experiencing similar symptoms: disorientation, auditory hallucinations, and a creeping sense of despair that seemed to emanate from outside their own consciousness. Sarah realized that despite their preparations, the others had found a way to begin their assault on human minds. But then she remembered something from Whitmore's journal, a frequency pattern he had discovered that seemed to provide protection against malevolent electromagnetic influence. Racing to her workstation, she began inputting the specific harmonics that the 1901 inventor had documented during his final experiments. The moment the protective frequency activated, the oppressive mental pressure in the laboratory began to lift. Team members stopped clutching their heads, and the equipment stabilized as the signal created a barrier against the other's psychological assault. "This is just the beginning," Sarah announced to the room as she broadcast the protective frequency to every shield generator in their network. "The others are testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. When their physical forms arrive, they'll coordinate their electromagnetic manipulation with direct action." Through the laboratory windows, the night sky had taken on an ominous quality. Stars seemed dimmer, as though something vast was moving between Earth and the distant stellar light. And in the electromagnetic spectrum invisible to human eyes, a battle for the future of human consciousness was already underway. Thomas Whitmore had faced this same choice over a century earlier: stand with the observers in defense of human independence, or allow the others to subjugate humanity to their will. Now, with less than 18 hours before the full arrival of these cosmic predators, the researchers at NASA Goddard represented humanity's last hope of completing what the brilliant inventor had started. Sarah looked around at her colleagues. seeing determination replacing fear in their expressions. They might not fully understand the forces they were facing, but they understood the stakes. The next 18 hours would determine whether humanity joined the galactic community as free participants or became slaves to entities that viewed consciousness itself as a resource to be harvested and controlled. With 12 hours remaining until the others' full arrival, Dr. Sarah Chen found herself alone in the depths of NASA Goddard's archives, desperately searching through digital records for any additional information about Thomas Whitmore's work. The electromagnetic shield network was holding, but she knew from the observers' warnings that their current defenses would not be sufficient against the others' full assault. The answer had to be in Whitmore's research, some crucial detail that had been overlooked or misunderstood during the frantic preparation of the past 2 days. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard as she accessed historical databases, patent records, and scientific journals from the early 1900s, looking for any trace of the inventor's work that might provide the key to strengthening their defenses. Then she found it. Buried in the records of the Detroit Patent Office was a document that had never been properly filed, a patent application dated November 17, 1903, just 1 day before Whitmore's disappearance. The title read, "Method and Apparatus for Consciousness Preservation via Electromagnetic Matrix Storage." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the scanned document. Whitmore's precise handwriting filled pages of technical diagrams that described a process for transferring human consciousness into crystalline structures capable of maintaining awareness independently of biological form. But this wasn't just theoretical speculation. The patent application included detailed construction notes and test results. According to the document, Whitmore had successfully created what he called a consciousness matrix, a crystalline array that could store and maintain human awareness while providing it with enhanced capabilities for electromagnetic manipulation. The implications were staggering. Whitmore hadn't simply disappeared in 1903. He had transcended physical existence to become a guardian presence capable of defending humanity across more than a century. Sarah raced back to Laboratory 7, clutching printouts of the patent application. The main laboratory was bustling with activity as teams monitored the electromagnetic shield network and tracked the approach of the others' geometric vessels. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his coordination station as she burst through the doors. "Sarah, where have you been? We've lost contact with the Australian facilities, and the European network is showing signs of destabilization." "I found it," she announced breathlessly. "The final piece of Whitmore's work. He didn't just create a beacon. He created a way to preserve human consciousness in electromagnetic form." She spread the patent documents across the main workstation, pointing to the technical diagrams. "Look at these specifications. Whitmore discovered how to transfer consciousness into crystalline matrices that can exist independently while maintaining the ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields. That's how he's been protecting the beacon signal for over a century." Dr. Harrison joined them, studying the documents with growing amazement. "Are you suggesting that Thomas Whitmore is still alive? That he's been existing as some form of electromagnetic consciousness for more than 100 years? "Not just alive," Sarah replied, her excitement growing as the pieces fell into place. "He's been preparing. Every major advancement in human electromagnetic technology over the past century has built upon principles he established in 1901. Radio, television, computers, satellite communications, they've all contributed to creating a global electromagnetic network that he can access and influence." As if responding to her words, the laboratory's equipment began registering a familiar frequency pattern, the same gentle pulses that had accompanied the observer's communication, but with a distinctly different quality, more human, more familiar. Dr. Kim looked up from his monitoring station with wonder in his eyes. "We're receiving a transmission, but it's not coming from space. The signal is originating from within Earth's electromagnetic field itself." The communication that followed was unlike anything they had experienced before. Instead of the abstract concepts conveyed by the observers, this contact carried the unmistakable personality of a human mind, one that had spent over a century growing in understanding and capability while maintaining its essential humanity. Thomas Whitmore's consciousness spoke to them, not through alien thought patterns, but through enhanced human intuition that bridged the gap between their limited understanding and the cosmic forces at play. He showed them that the electromagnetic shield network they had created was only the foundation of a much more comprehensive defense system. Using the crystalline consciousness preservation technology, key individuals could transcend physical form while retaining their ability to coordinate electromagnetic defenses. The process wasn't death, it was evolution, a transformation that would allow human consciousness to exist on the same level as the cosmic intelligences they were facing. But the choice had to be made quickly. The others' assault was intensifying, and their geometric vessels had begun descending through Earth's atmosphere. Cities around the world were reporting strange phenomena, electronic devices functioning erratically, widespread disruption of communications, and reports of people experiencing invasive thoughts that didn't seem to be their own. Sarah understood what Whitmore was offering, the chance to join him in electromagnetic form, to become part of a consciousness network capable of defending humanity against the others while maintaining communication with the observers. But the transformation would be irreversible, cutting her off forever from normal human experience. How many of us would need to make this choice? She asked, though she somehow knew that the question was being heard by Whitmore's consciousness directly. The answer came not as words but as understanding. 12 individuals, positioned at key points around the globe, linked through the crystalline matrices into a network of enhanced human consciousness capable of coordinating electromagnetic defenses on a planetary scale. Sarah looked around the laboratory at her colleagues, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination that she felt. In 8 hours, the others would complete their descent to Earth. The choice of whether humanity would remain free or become enslaved to cosmic predators rested with a small group of researchers who had stumbled upon a century-old photograph. Thomas Whitmore had made his choice in 1903, sacrificing his physical existence to become humanity's hidden guardian. Now it was their turn to decide how far they were willing to go to preserve human independence in a universe filled with intelligences far beyond their current understanding. With 6 hours remaining until the others' final descent, Laboratory 7 had been transformed into something that resembled both a high-tech research facility and an ancient temple. 12 crystalline matrices, constructed according to Thomas Whitmore's century-old specifications, but built with modern precision, were arranged in a perfect circle around the laboratory's electromagnetic field generator. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the matrix that would soon house her consciousness, its translucent structure pulsing with a soft inner light that seemed almost alive. Around the laboratory, 11 other volunteers from research facilities worldwide had arrived to take their places in what Whitmore's consciousness had described as the Guardian Network, a collection of enhanced human minds capable of coordinating planetary electromagnetic defenses. Dr. Rodriguez had volunteered immediately upon understanding the stakes, as had Dr. Kim and 3 other researchers from Goddard. The remaining positions were filled by brilliant minds from CERN, Tokyo, MIT, and other facilities that had maintained contact, despite the others' increasing interference. Each person understood that they were about to sacrifice their physical existence for the chance to preserve human freedom. The transformation process will take approximately 30 minutes, Dr. Harrison announced, reading from Whitmore's technical specifications. As facility director, he had chosen to remain in physical form to coordinate with global authorities and manage the transition. Once initiated, there will be no possibility of reversal. Sarah felt a mixture of terror and anticipation as she approached her assigned matrix. The crystalline structure was beautiful in its complexity, geometric patterns that seemed to extend into dimensions beyond normal 3-dimensional space. According to Whitmore's documentation, these crystals were grown using electromagnetic fields tuned to specific frequencies that resonated with human consciousness itself. Through the laboratory's enhanced communication system, she could sense Whitmore's presence growing stronger as the moment of transformation approached. His consciousness had maintained its vigil for over a century, but the strain of operating alone against cosmic forces was evident. The Guardian Network would not only strengthen humanity's defenses, but provide him with the companionship of other enhanced human minds. Initiating consciousness transfer sequence, Dr. Harrison announced from his control station, all matrices showing optimal resonance patterns. Sarah placed her hands on the designated contact points of her crystalline matrix and immediately felt a tingling sensation that quickly intensified into something far more profound. Her consciousness began to expand beyond the boundaries of her physical brain, spreading through electromagnetic pathways that connected her to the quantum field underlying reality itself. The transformation wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. She felt her awareness growing to encompass electromagnetic frequencies across the entire spectrum, from radio waves to gamma radiation. Through this expanded perception, she could sense the presence of her 11 companions undergoing the same process, their consciousness blending with hers to form a collective intelligence while maintaining their individual personalities. But most remarkable was her connection to Thomas Whitmore himself. His consciousness reached out to welcome her, and she experienced the full scope of his century-long vigil. He had watched human civilization develop from the horse and buggy era to the space age, gently influencing technological advancement to prepare for this moment, while simultaneously maintaining the beacon that would eventually attract the observer's attention. Through Whitmore's enhanced perspective, Sarah could see the true nature of the cosmic conflict surrounding Earth. The observers represented one faction in a galactic community of consciousness, beings who had evolved beyond physical form to exist as pure intelligence capable of traveling instantaneously across vast distances. They sought to guide younger civilizations towards similar transcendence, while respecting their right to develop independently. The others, however, viewed emerging consciousness as a threat to their own dominance. They had enslaved dozens of worlds, harvesting the electromagnetic signatures of living minds to fuel their own expansion across the galaxy. To them, humanity represented nothing more than another source of psychic energy to be captured and controlled. As the transformation neared completion, Sarah felt her new consciousness synchronizing with the global electromagnetic field. Through the network of crystalline matrices, she and her companions could monitor and influence electronic systems worldwide, coordinate defensive measures across continents, and communicate instantaneously regardless of physical distance. "Transformation complete," she heard Dr. Harrison announce, though his voice now seemed to come from very far away. Her connection to physical reality had become tenuous, replaced by a far more vivid awareness of the electromagnetic spectrum and the cosmic intelligences moving within it. The Guardian network was operational. Through her enhanced perception, Sarah could sense the others' vessels completing their descent through Earth's atmosphere. The geometric ships were positioning themselves above major population centers, preparing to begin the process of consciousness harvesting that had claimed so many other worlds. But this time, they would face resistance they had never encountered before, a hybrid of human determination and cosmic awareness that combined the best qualities of both emerging and transcended consciousness. Thomas Whitmore's century of preparation had created the foundation for humanity's defense, but it would be the Guardian network that determined whether his sacrifice had been worthwhile. "Welcome to the next stage of human evolution," Whitmore's consciousness communicated to his new companions. "Now let us show these cosmic predators what happens when they threaten a species that refuses to surrender its freedom." Through the network's collective awareness, Sarah could sense the others beginning their final approach. In less than 4 hours, the battle for humanity's future would begin in earnest. But for the first time since discovering the glowing orb in that century-old photograph, she felt genuinely confident that humanity would emerge victorious. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. The others began their assault at exactly 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, launching their attack simultaneously across 12 major population centers worldwide. Through the Guardian network's enhanced perception, Sarah Chen experienced the invasion from a perspective that no human had ever possessed, seeing the battle unfold across multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. The geometric vessels, now revealed in their full malevolent glory, descended over New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing, and 7 other cities. Each ship appeared as a massive angular structure that seemed to absorb light and electromagnetic energy, creating zones of unnatural darkness that spread outward from their positions. But the true attack wasn't physical. It was a coordinated assault on human consciousness itself. From her crystalline matrix in Laboratory 7, Sarah felt the others' psychic weapons probe the edges of Earth's electromagnetic field. Their strategy was sophisticated and terrifying. They sought to overwhelm individual human minds with invasive thought patterns, gradually breaking down personal identity until entire populations became extensions of their collective will. They're targeting the major communications networks first. Thomas Whitmore's consciousness informed the Guardian network. If they can control global media and internet infrastructure, they can amplify their psychological manipulation exponentially. Through the network's collective awareness, Sarah watched in horror as television broadcasts worldwide began displaying hypnotic geometric patterns designed to make human minds more susceptible to alien influence. Social media platforms flooded with posts containing subliminal programming that bypassed conscious perception entirely. Even radio frequencies carried harmonics that induced states of passive compliance in anyone exposed to them. But the Guardian network was ready. Initiating consciousness shield deployment, Sarah announced to her 11 companions. Her thoughts transmitted instantaneously across the crystalline matrix network. Focus on the major population centers first. Working in perfect coordination, the 12 enhanced human minds began projecting protective electromagnetic fields around the cities under attack. The shields weren't visible to normal human perception, but they created barriers that prevented the others' psychological weapons from reaching their intended targets. The effect was immediate and dramatic. In New York City, millions of people who had been staring blankly at the hypnotic patterns on their screens suddenly blinked and looked away in confusion. Across London, the eerie compliance that had been spreading through the population gave way to normal human reactions of fear and determination. In Tokyo, crowds that had been moving in unnaturally synchronized patterns broke apart as individuals regained control of their own thoughts. The others responded with increased intensity, redirecting their geometric vessels to focus their attacks on the source of the interference. Sarah felt their attention turn toward the Guardian network itself, and the sensation was like being examined by intelligences so alien that her enhanced consciousness could barely comprehend their thought patterns. "They've identified us as the primary threat," Dr. Rodriguez's consciousness warned through the network. "They're preparing to target our crystalline matrices directly." What followed was a battle unlike anything in human history, a conflict fought entirely in the electromagnetic spectrum between transcended human consciousness and cosmic predators that had enslaved dozens of worlds. The others launched focused assaults on each Guardian position, attempting to shatter the crystalline matrices and destroy the enhanced minds they contained. But Thomas Whitmore had prepared for this moment across more than a century. His consciousness flowed through the network like a master conductor, coordinating defensive strategies that combined human intuition with cosmic-level understanding of electromagnetic manipulation. "Remember," his voice echoed through the collective awareness, "we're not just defending Earth. We're demonstrating that consciousness cannot be conquered by force alone. The observers are watching to see if humanity deserves a place in the galactic community." Sarah found herself at the center of a psychic storm as the others concentrated their attack on her position. Geometric patterns of pure malevolence pressed against her consciousness, seeking to corrupt and control her enhanced awareness, but she held firm, drawing strength from her connection to the other Guardians and the millions of human minds they were protecting. Through the network, she could sense Dr. Kim repelling a massive assault on the Asian population centers, his consciousness blazing with determination as he projected shields over Tokyo and Beijing. Dr. Rodriguez coordinated the defense of South America, his enhanced mind creating barriers that turned the others' weapons back on themselves. The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The others' geometric vessels hung motionless over Earth's cities, their alien intelligences focused entirely on breaking through the Guardian network's defenses. But humanity's protectors held firm, their crystalline matrices pulsing with increasing intensity as they drew power from the planet's own electromagnetic field. Then, at the moment when the conflict seemed destined to continue indefinitely, the observers intervened. Sarah felt their presence as a wave of benevolent energy that swept through the electromagnetic spectrum, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of a galactic civilization. But they weren't joining the battle directly. Instead, they were offering humanity something far more valuable. "The choice is before you." Their communication reached every enhanced consciousness in the Guardian network simultaneously. "You have proven your species worthy of independence, but will you choose isolation or integration with the greater community of transcended minds?" Through the network's collective awareness, Sarah understood that humanity stood at a crossroads. They could use the observer's intervention to drive off the others and continue developing in isolation, or they could accept guidance that would accelerate their evolution toward cosmic consciousness while maintaining their essential humanity. The decision had to be unanimous among the Guardian network, and Sarah felt the weight of representing her entire species in the choice that would determine humanity's cosmic future. The Guardian Network's decision was reached not through debate, but through a profound moment of collective understanding that transcended individual consciousness. 12 enhanced human minds, connected through crystalline matrices and guided by Thomas Whitmore's century of wisdom, arrived at the same conclusion simultaneously. Humanity would accept the observer's guidance while maintaining its independence and essential character. Sarah Chen felt the choice resonate through every level of her transcended awareness as the Guardian Network transmitted their unanimous decision to the observers. The response was immediate and transformative, a wave of cosmic knowledge that flowed through the crystalline matrices and into the global electromagnetic field, carrying with it principles of consciousness manipulation that the others could never overcome. The effect on the geometric vessels was dramatic and immediate. The angular ships that had hung menacingly over Earth's major cities began to lose their cohesion, their dark surfaces flickering as the observer's intervention disrupted the others' ability to maintain physical form in normal space. One by one, the predatory intelligences retreated from Earth's electromagnetic field, their psychic weapons rendered useless against the combined strength of human determination and cosmic wisdom. Through the Guardian Network's enhanced perception, Sarah watched the others' final withdrawal, with a mixture of relief and sadness. These entities had once been a developing species like humanity, but they had chosen conquest over cooperation, domination over understanding. Their path had led to isolation and eventual stagnation, while humanity's choice opened doorways to possibilities beyond current imagination. The immediate threat has passed. Thomas Whitmore's consciousness communicated to the network, his thoughts carrying the satisfaction of a guardian whose century-long vigil had finally achieved its purpose. But our work is just beginning. As dawn broke over NASA Goddard, Dr. Harrison and the remaining physical staff watched in amazement as the crystalline matrices pulsed with new patterns of light. The Guardian Network was no longer simply defensive. It had become a bridge between human consciousness and the galactic community of transcended minds. Through the laboratory's enhanced communication systems, Sarah's voice reached her former colleagues, though it now carried harmonics that suggested vast depths of understanding. The transformation is complete, but not in the way we expected. We haven't just defended Earth. We've graduated to a new level of existence. Over the following days, the implications of humanity's cosmic graduation became apparent worldwide. Electronic devices began functioning with unprecedented efficiency as the Guardian Network optimized global communications infrastructure. Scientific research accelerated dramatically as enhanced human consciousness provided insights that bridged the gaps between theoretical knowledge and practical application. But perhaps most importantly, the psychological effects of the others' failed invasion began to heal under the Guardian Network's gentle influence. People around the world reported feelings of connection and purpose that transcended their individual concerns, as though they were part of something larger and more meaningful than they had ever imagined. The observers maintained their presence in Earth's electromagnetic field, not as conquerors or controllers, but as teachers and guides. Through the Guardian Network, they shared knowledge about the true nature of consciousness, the principles governing transcended existence, and humanity's potential role in the cosmic community. Sarah found herself serving as one of the primary translators between human understanding and cosmic wisdom. Her consciousness had retained its essential humanity while gaining access to perspectives that spanned galactic distances and geological time periods. She could see Earth's future unfolding in multiple possible timelines, each one dependent on the choices humanity would make in the coming decades. What Thomas Whitmore began in 1901 was not just first contact, she explained to a gathering of world leaders through the laboratory's quantum communication system. It was the first step in humanity's evolution toward cosmic consciousness. The photograph that started our investigation wasn't just evidence of alien visitation. It was a seed planted by our own future selves, ensuring that we would be ready when the time came to choose our destiny. The glowing orb that had appeared behind the inventor in that century-old photograph now made perfect sense. It hadn't been an alien artifact at all, but a manifestation of Whitmore's own transcended consciousness, appearing to his past self, to ensure that the proper preparations would be made for humanity's cosmic graduation. As weeks turned to months, the Guardian Network's influence spread throughout human civilization. War became obsolete as enhanced understanding revealed the fundamental interconnectedness of all consciousness. Environmental destruction ceased as humanity recognized its role as caretakers of a living planet that served as home to billions of developing minds. Most remarkably, new generations of humans began displaying natural abilities that previous generations had only dreamed of: telepathic communication, electromagnetic manipulation, and intuitive understanding of cosmic principles. The transformation wasn't limited to the 12 individuals in the crystalline matrices. It was affecting the entire species as human consciousness evolved toward its full potential. Standing in Laboratory 7, Dr. Harrison often contemplated the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with Sarah's analysis of a simple historical photograph. A routine documentation project had revealed evidence of contact that spanned more than a century, ultimately leading to humanity's acceptance into a galactic community of transcended minds. Through the crystalline matrices, Sarah's consciousness reached out to touch every human mind on Earth, offering comfort, guidance, and the promise of a future that stretched beyond the boundaries of a single planet. Humanity had faced the ultimate test and chosen cooperation over conquest, wisdom over power, transcendence over isolation. The photograph from 1901 now occupied a place of honor in the laboratory, its glowing orb serving as a reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries begin with the simplest questions. Thomas Whitmore's century-long vigil was complete, but his legacy would endure as long as human consciousness continued to reach toward the stars, seeking not to conquer, but to understand, not to dominate, but to transcend. In the end, the glowing orb behind the inventor had been dismissed by those who lacked the vision to see beyond their immediate understanding. But when humanity developed the technology and wisdom necessary to properly interpret the message, they discovered that the greatest discoveries often come disguised as impossible mysteries, waiting patiently for minds capable of embracing the impossible and transforming it into the foundation of a new reality.